The morning everything changed. Adaobi Okafor was 8 minutes late. 8 minutes. That number sat in her chest the entire bus ride, heavier than it had any right to be. She gripped the overhead rail of the Danfo as it lurched through Lekki traffic, her teeth pressed together, her right knee wrapped so tightly beneath her trousers that she could feel her own heartbeat in it. 8 minutes. Not 8 hours. Not 8 days. 8 minutes. And yet her hands were trembling, because in 4 years, she had never been late. Not once. Not during the flooding of 2021, when the water reached her thighs on the road outside Chevron, and she waded through in silence, arrived at the lobby soaked to the waist, and went straight to her desk before anyone else had powered on their computers. Not during her father's first hospitalization, when she spent the entire night on a hard hospital bench in Enugu, took the first bus back at 4 a.m., and walked into the Lee Continental Logistics building at 7:52 a.m. with her eyes dry. Not even on the morning of her younger brother Emeka Jr.'s burial, the burial she had organized alone, paid for alone, did she give herself the mercy of absence. She had always arrived, on time, composed, invisible in her pain. And today, because of a knee that had been quietly destroying itself for 7 weeks, she was 8 minutes late. The bus stopped. She descended carefully, not letting anyone see how deliberately she placed her right foot on the step. She walked the remaining 6 minutes to the building with her jaw set and her face arranged into its usual stillness. The kind of face she had spent 33 years perfecting. The face that said, "I am fine. I am always fine. Do not look too closely." Mr. Ade was at the security post when she arrived. He was old, the kind of old that carries its years quietly, and he had a habit of watching people the way a man watches weather. Not nosily, but carefully, with the attention of someone who has seen enough to know the difference between calm and the air before a storm. He opened the barrier for her without a word, but his eyes tracked her as she passed. They dropped, just briefly, to her right leg. She pretended not to notice. The office floor felt different the moment she stepped off the elevator. It always did when something was off. The silence had a particular texture. Conversations that died mid-sentence. Daniel Adebayo looked up from his desk and looked back down immediately, which meant he had been watching the elevator. Chisholm Ease, who normally called out a greeting from across the floor, kept her eyes on her screen. The air conditioning felt colder than usual, though Adaobi knew it was not. She walked to her desk, set down her bag with controlled precision, and was reaching for her headset when she heard it. "You're late." She did not startle. She turned slowly, because startling would have bent her knee the wrong way, and she had learned in 7 weeks to manage every movement like a choreography designed to prevent collapse. Chairman Lee Min-suk stood at the door of his office. 54 years old, founder and head of LCL Group, a Korean logistics company that had anchored itself in Lagos with the quiet authority of a man who did not need to announce his arrival in any room. He was not a large man physically, but there was a density to him, a gravitational weight in his stillness that made entire boardrooms rearrange themselves without him asking. He wore a dark suit. His expression was what it always was, unreadable, precise, and watching. He rarely repeated himself. "I apologize, sir," she said. Her voice was level. "It will not happen again." He looked at her for a moment in the way he had, not with accusation, not with softness, just with attention, and then he turned and went back inside his office. Adaobi exhaled once, turned to the small kitchen alcove behind her desk, and began preparing his coffee. She reached for the cabinet handle, shifted her weight, and for 3 seconds, her right knee buckled. Not dramatically, not to the floor, just a quiet, treacherous surrender. The joint folding slightly inward, her hand catching the counter, her body recovering before anyone could process what they had seen. Except that someone already had. She felt it before she confirmed it. That particular quality of being observed, not casually, but with the focused attention of someone who has already filed away what they've seen and is now deciding what to do with it. She straightened, poured the coffee, carried it to his office, set it down on the coaster, 3 centimeters from the corner, as always, and was turning to leave when he spoke. "What happened to your leg?" She stopped. The question was quiet, not loud, not pressing. He asked it the way he asked most things, as though he already knew the answer, and was simply giving her the courtesy of offering her own version first. "I slipped," she said. "A few weeks ago. It's nothing." A beat of silence. That was all. She left. But she knew, walking back to her desk with her face still perfectly composed, that Chairman Lee Min-suk did not say when he believed you. He said it when he had already decided to be patient. Tell me, have you ever carried something so heavy for so long that the weight became invisible even to you? Drop a comment. Because what Adaobi was carrying was about to cost her everything. To understand Adaobi Okafor, you had to understand what she had been built by. She grew up in Enugu, in a house where the electricity came and went but the books never did. Her father, Emeka Okafor, had been a secondary school teacher for 31 years, government secondary school, Enugu, teaching literature and history to children who would forget his name, but not the way he made them feel seen. He was a gentleman, the kind of gentle that is not weakness but a choice, chosen every day against a world that kept offering him reasons to become harder. He quoted Chinua Achebe. He laughed from his stomach. He smelled of chalk and rob and old paper. Her mother had died when Adaobi was 19, a Thursday. Quiet. The kind of death that doesn't announce itself, just withdraws like a tide going out while you're looking the other way. After that, Adaobi became what the family needed. She finished university with a distinction in business administration, moved to Lagos, got the job at LCL Group, and began sending money home every month before she spent anything on herself. When her father's stroke came, 18 months ago, it arrived without mercy, left side weakness, speech disruption. The man who had stood before classrooms for 3 decades now struggled to form sentences. He had moved in with her immediately, into her 2-room apartment in Aja, where she had arranged everything to accommodate him. Mrs. Bose came 3 times a week for physiotherapy. The hospital in Lekki required monthly reviews. The medication list was long and changed often. Her salary was not small by any ordinary measure. But ordinary measures did not account for hospital bills, medication, physiotherapy sessions, rent in a city that charged Lagos prices for Lagos proximity, and the slow, patient erosion of every buffer she had built. She did not complain. Complaining felt like an announcement of failure, like standing in the middle of a road and telling oncoming traffic that you were tired. She simply adjusted, bought less, ate less variety, stopped saving, told her siblings she was managing. She was always managing. Every morning, she woke at 5:15, prepared her father's medication, made sure Mrs. Bose's instructions from the previous session were followed, wrapped her knee, carefully, tightly, the way she had learned from a YouTube tutorial, since an actual doctor's appointment was not yet possible. Took 2 painkillers, waited for them to soften the edges. Then, bus to Aja Junction, connecting bus to Lekki, 10-minute walk to the office building. In and out. Invisible. Reliable. Fine. The knee happened on a Tuesday in March. A power outage at 11 p.m. NEPA, unannounced, as always. The apartment went dark, and the generator had run out of fuel. Her father's room lost the small fan that helped him sleep. In the darkness, he tried to get up himself, tried to navigate to the doorway, perhaps to call for her, and she heard it. The shift of weight, the drag of his slower leg, the precarious balance of a man whose body no longer entirely obeyed him. She moved before she thought, crossed the room in the dark, her foot catching the edge of the low stool near the doorframe. She reached him just as he tilted. She caught him, both arms, full weight, and they stumbled together against the wall. His head was safe. His shoulder absorbed the impact. He was frightened but unhurt. She had twisted her knee to catch him, wrenching it sideways at an angle the joint was not designed to accept. She felt something tear. Not heard, felt. A deep, interior ripping sensation that traveled up her leg and lodged itself at the base of her spine. She did not cry out. She lowered her father back onto the bed, found the torchlight on her phone, checked him thoroughly, assured him in a calm voice that everything was fine, and then sat on the floor against the wall in the dark for 20 minutes while the pain introduced itself to her with terrible sincerity. She could not afford an MRI. A private orthopedic consultation in Lagos started at 15,000 naira before any imaging. She had nothing spare, nothing at all, so she wrapped it. 2 days off work, the first sick day she had taken in 4 years, and she told Daniel it was a stomach issue. Then she came back, wrapped tighter, stronger painkillers. She recalibrated every movement, how she descended bus steps, how she climbed stairs, how she stood from seated position. She turned pain management into an art form the way she had turned everything else in her life into one. Through discipline, through silence, through the stubborn refusal to be anything less than fine. 7 weeks. Nobody knew, except that someone had begun paying attention. It started small, so small that the first time, she thought it was a coincidence. She arrived on a Wednesday morning to find a gel ice pack wrapped in a cloth sitting on the corner of her desk. No note, no explanation. She asked Daniel. He shrugged and said he hadn't put it there. She looked around the floor. Nobody made eye contact in a way that suggested acknowledgement. She looked toward Chairman Lee's closed office door. She used the ice pack, set it in the small freezer in the kitchen alcove, and used it during the lunch hour when the office quieted, pressing it to her knee under the desk where no one could see. The following Monday, there was a medical knee brace. Her exact size, clinical grade, the kind sold at orthopedic supply shops, not pharmacies. Still no note. She stared at it for a long time. Then she folded it back into its packaging and placed it at the bottom of her desk drawer, because to use it visibly would be to admit what she had been refusing to admit, and she was not ready for that. But she wore it home that night, under her trousers, on the bus, in the dark. She wore it all night, and in the morning she felt the difference, just slightly, and she hated herself for how much relief something so small could give. 2 weeks passed this way. Small silences, small provisions. Nothing said. Then one afternoon, he walked past her desk without stopping and asked, quietly, almost to the air, "You still take buses?" She looked up. His eyes were already moving on, his face still carrying its usual expression of composed attention. She said, "Yes, sir." He nodded once and kept walking. That evening, she sat at her desk after the others had gone and tried to understand how he knew. She had never told anyone. She was never driven. There was no reason the chairman of a logistics company with 14 company vehicles should know the commuting arrangements of his executive assistant, unless he had been watching for longer than she realized. At what point would you have spoken up? Because Adaobi had crossed a line most people can't even imagine. And what happened next changed everything. Stay with us. It happened on a Thursday. Late. Past 7 p.m. the cleaning crew had come and gone. The fluorescent lights in the open office had been switched off, leaving only the desk lamps burning. Adaobi had stayed because there was a shipping manifest review due by morning, and she was the only one who processed them with the precision Chairman Lee required. She had been sitting for 4 hours. When she stood to collect the final printouts from across the room, her knee, with no warning, no gradual deterioration, nothing, simply gave out. Not buckled, not weakened, gave out. Complete failure. She went down against the desk with both hands, paper scattering, her chair rolling backward, her body making the kind of sound that furniture makes when something has gone structurally wrong. She could not straighten up. The joint had locked in a position that was neither bent nor extended, just suspended in pain, and every attempt to shift it sent a white current up her thigh and into her hip. She was alone. She was on the floor, half crouched against the desk, and she was alone, and she could not move, and she would not call out because there was no one to call to, and she had spent 7 weeks ensuring there was no one to call to. She pressed both palms against the desk surface and breathed through her nose and tried to remember the YouTube video, the one that said to ice it, elevate it, rest, none of which she could do right now, crouched on an office floor with her face turned away from the door. She heard the footsteps before she could do anything about her position. Chairman Lee had come back. She did not know why. She never found out whether it was habit, instinct, or that particular quality of attention he seemed to operate with at all times. All she knew was that the door from the private corridor opened, and when she managed to turn her head, he was standing very still in the doorway, taking in the scene in front of him with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not pity, not alarm, something quieter and more complicated than either. He crossed the floor and crouched beside her, not reaching for her, not touching her, just getting to her level. And in a voice that she would remember for the rest of her life, not because of what it contained, but because of what it did not contain. No judgment, no impatience, no performance of concern. He said, "Tell me everything." She opened her mouth to say, "I'm fine." And for the first time in 7 weeks, possibly for the first time in years, the words did not come. What came instead was the thing she had been holding back since 11 p.m. on a Tuesday in March, when she felt something tear in the dark while keeping her father from falling. It came slowly at first, the way water finds a crack before the crack becomes a fracture. Her father. The stroke. The bills. The monthly arithmetic that never added up. The knee. The exact moment. The exact sound. And the 7 weeks of medication and wrapping and recalibrating every step. The eviction notice that had arrived 3 weeks ago because the building's owner was selling and the new buyer didn't want tenants. The amount she still owed the hospital from her father's last review. She was not crying. She did not cry easily. And this was not a moment of weakness. It was something different. It was the sound of a structure that had been bearing too much weight for too long finally being allowed to set it down. Chairman Lee listened. He sat on the floor of his own company's office at 7 p.m. and listened with the full attention he gave to quarterly reports and international contracts. He did not interrupt. He did not offer comfort at the wrong moments. He let her finish. Then he stood, straightened his jacket, and said, "Can you stand if I help?" She nodded. "Then let's go." The hospital was a private facility in Victoria Island that Adaobi had walked past many times without ever considering entering. Dr. Han Ji-young was already waiting when they arrived. A Korean Nigerian orthopedic specialist, compact and precise, whose expression when she examined the knee shifted from professional neutrality to something that could only be described as controlled alarm. The MRI took 40 minutes. Adaobi sat in the waiting area in a hospital gown, staring at the wall. Chairman Lee sat across from her, reading something on his phone. They did not speak. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who had already said the important thing and were now simply waiting for the world to respond. Dr. Han brought the results herself. Complete medial meniscus tear. Partial ACL compromise. Mild cartilage were consistent with 7 weeks of weight-bearing on an acute injury. She explained it with the patience of someone who had given difficult diagnoses before, but her eyes carried a layer of disbelief she couldn't quite contain. "You've been walking on this," she said, not a question. "For 7 weeks?" "Yes," Adaobi said. Dr. Han looked at her for a moment. Then she looked at Chairman Lee. "She needs surgery, arthroscopic repair, followed by 6 to 8 weeks of structured rehabilitation. If she continues without intervention," she stopped. "She needs surgery," Chairman Lee said. "What else does she need?" Dr. Han listed everything. The surgical costs, the physiotherapy program, the follow-up reviews. He said, "Arrange it." 2 words. No hesitation. No performance of generosity. No speech about how glad he was to help. No visible expectation of gratitude. Just arrange it, the way he arranged shipping manifests and contract reviews, because it needed to be done and he had the means to do it. Adaobi looked at him. He was already looking at his phone again. She turned back to the wall. Her jaw was tight. She was not accustomed to receiving. Every mechanism she had built, every habit, every reflex, they were all constructed around giving and withstanding and enduring. This thing that was happening, someone simply arranging for her to be okay, sat against all of it like something foreign entering her bloodstream. Her body didn't know how to process it. She processed it anyway. The changes were not dramatic. They arrived quietly, the way most meaningful things do. A company vehicle began collecting her each morning. Not an announcement. It simply appeared outside her building at 6:45 a.m., and the driver, a man named Tund who had apparently been briefed to say nothing and simply drive, greeted her with the same professional silence she had always projected herself. The office adjusted her schedule around her physiotherapy appointments. Daniel took on portions of the manifest reviews without being asked. She suspected he had been told to, but he did it with such natural willingness that she couldn't be certain. Chisholm brought her lunch twice, just set it on the desk and said, "I made too much," and walked away. The third time, Adaobi said thank you, and Chisholm said, don't worry, and they looked at each other with the understanding of two women who knew what it cost to say those words. The surgery went smoothly. Dr. Han was efficient and confident. The recovery was not painless, but it was structured, and structure was something Adaobi had always known how to live inside. Mrs. Bose, who came for her father, began coordinating with the physiotherapy clinic. The house moved around her with new rhythm. Her father's rehabilitation, freed from the weight of her constant anxiety, seemed to accelerate. Not dramatically. Strokes were not dramatic in their recoveries, only in their initial strikes, but steadily. He was forming more sentences, recognizing more faces on television, arguing, gently, with Mrs. Bowes about the exercises, which was the clearest sign of returning personality. The eviction had seemed impossible to solve, and then it was solved. She did not know all the details. Chairman Lee did not share them. What she knew was that he had discovered the building was being sold, that the new area he identified was a ground-floor accessible apartment in Aja with wider door frames and a small garden, that the rent was lower than what she had been paying, and that the lease had been arranged in a way she could actually afford. When she tried to ask what exactly had happened, he looked at her with that careful, unreadable expression and said, "Good employees should not spend their strength surviving." She did not argue. She had learned, in the weeks since the hospital floor, that there were certain things Chairman Lee said that were not openings for discussion. They were simply statements of how he believed the world should work, offered without apology and requiring nothing in return. She filed that sentence in the part of her mind where she kept the things she would think about for a very long time. Moving day arrived on a Saturday with overcast skies and the smell of rain that had not yet decided to fall. It was not a large move. Adaobi did not own much. She had spent 4 years reducing herself to essentials, and so the essentials were all there was. Boxes, her father's chair, the small cabinet where she kept his medications in labeled rows, the books, which were the only extravagance she had permitted herself across every budget reconstruction. Her father was seated on the small bench outside the old apartment when Chairman Lee arrived. He had come without announcement, simply appeared, as he had a habit of doing, in the way of people who don't require much ceremony. He was not in a suit, just dark trousers and a light shirt. He stood for a moment, looking at the organized arrangement of boxes, and then looked at her father. Emeka Okafor looked back. He had been briefed, in the gentle way Adaobi had learned to brief him since the stroke, slowly, with repetition, with time for each piece to settle. He knew who this man was. He knew what he had done. He had sat quietly with that knowledge for 2 weeks, turning it over. Chairman Lee walked to him, and without the formal architecture of boardroom exchanges, he bowed. A slight, genuine inclination, the kind that carries actual respect rather than performance. He straightened and waited. Her father took a long time to speak. The words still came slowly, assembled with effort, each one placed like a man carrying something fragile across uncertain ground. His left hand rested on his knee. His eyes were clear. "Thank you," he said. A pause. His throat moved. "For protecting my daughter." The overcast sky held its weather. Nobody moved. Daniel, who had come to help with boxes, looked at the ground. Chisholm, standing near the gate, pressed her lips together. Chairman Lee looked at the old teacher. This gentle man who had spent 31 years making other people's children feel seen, and who was now looking at him with eyes that had earned the right to say exactly what they meant. He bowed again, deeper this time. When he straightened, he said, "She protected everyone else first." Silence. The kind of silence that happens when something true has been spoken in the presence of people who know it is true. Not empty. Weighted. The kind that asks you to stay in it for a moment, rather than rushing past it to what comes next. 8 months later, Adaobi Okafor walked without a limp. It was such a simple thing, a thing most people did without thinking, the way they breathed or blinked, and she was aware of it every single morning. Aware of the right knee moving exactly as it was designed to move, bearing her weight without negotiation, carrying her from the company vehicle to the elevator to her desk, without the choreography of avoidance she had practiced for so long that she had forgotten what ordinary movement felt like. Her father was still recovering. Strokes did not reverse on schedule, and she had made her peace with that. But he was reading again. Last week he had quoted Achebe to Mrs. Bowes, unprompted, and Mrs. Bowes had written it down and shown Adaobi that evening. She had read it 4 times. The relationship with Chairman Lee was what it had always been, professional, respectful, clear-eyed. There were no grand gestures, no renegotiation of boundaries. He still arrived at exactly the same time. His coffee was still prepared to the same specification. He still said when he had decided to be patient with something, and she still knew what it meant. But there was something underneath the professional surface now. Not warmth exactly, because that was not his language, and she had stopped needing it to be, but the particular kind of regard that forms between two people who have seen each other clearly and decided, without announcement, to continue. She had spent years believing that survival meant hiding every struggle. That dignity required showing only the parts of yourself that had already been solved. That asking for help was a form of surrender. She no longer believed that. Strength, she had come to understand, was not measured by how long you carried pain in silence. Any body could be trained to endure. Any mind could be conditioned to suppress. That was not strength. That was just endurance wearing strength's clothing. Real strength, the kind that actually changed anything, began the moment someone worthy of your trust finally saw the weight you had been carrying, and you let them see it. Not because you were weak, because you had finally decided that surviving alone was not the same as living. Dignity was not diminished by accepting help from those who had earned the right to offer it. She knew that now. She set Chairman Lee's coffee on the coaster, 3 centimeters from the corner, and walked back to her desk, and sat down, and began her morning exactly as she always had, except that her hands were steady, and her knee did not ache, and somewhere in Aja, her father was reading. If this story moved you, if you've ever carried something in silence because asking for help felt like losing, let me know in the comments. Your story matters more than you think. And if you're new here, don't leave without subscribing. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and drop your thoughts in the comments.